Welcome to episode 1 of Asperger's L's podcast. I'm your host, Alex Byer, and I was diagnosed with Asperger's at the age of 19. Let's get a disclaimer out of the way. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professional, I'm just a guy with the disorder. And as such, I can offer you personal life experiences and anecdotes from having the disorder and living with it that may be relatable to you. I can't offer cures or solutions because in reality those don't actually exist. But I can share with you what I do to help ease the problems with the disorder, kind of mute some of the annoying aspects of the disorder. Now, with that said, this is going to be a mostly negatively toned podcast series due to the fact that the bad kind of outweigh the good when it comes to this disorder. I'll try to make sure that it's not just nonstop negative, that there's some actual legitimate positive aspects that are covered, because there are some, and as I said, we'll definitely talk about those too. But for the most part, there's a lot of dark stuff, but I also don't want to trivialize the disorder by ending it on a phony positive note if there's not one to be had. Meaning, one thing I hate about other podcasts in a similar vein, besides the fact that they're usually from a relative standpoint, like a parent or a caretaker's standpoint, or from a professional standpoint, is that they also feel the need to end it on some cheesy sentiment like their gift, or something that trivializes the actual weight of the disorder, in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying those don't serve their purposes, but for me, I find it to be, one, too general, two, sometimes insulting and inappropriate. Because sometimes you don't want to hear the cookie cutter positive end note when in reality there are really shitty aspects of this disorder. I guess this is a good time to let you know that there will be harsh language used throughout this. So, fair warning, and the content might be questionable. Everything in this podcast series is from my point of view, or I'll try to. I want to speak mostly from my own personal experience and not delve into aspects of the disorder that don't affect me, because then I'll be speaking out of turn and not educated enough on that matter to give it the proper reverence it deserves. So with that said, the content and views expressed in this are strictly my own. And when I'm retelling events of my childhood, they're from my perspective, the way I interpreted it, and the way I received the information. Now, like every story, there's multiple sides. As they say, there's the truth, there's the two sides, and then the truth. But whatever. I'll try to not be as subjective, and this is getting a little rambly as is. So, without retarding things any further, let's talk about what autism is in the basic sense. Autism is a spectrum of disorders that, as such, is then characterized into groups: the low functioning and the high functioning, with the differentiating factors being that the low functioning tend to be nonverbal, where the high functioning can maintain a conversation, but they may have weird quirks to their speech, and such as weird cadence issues, if that hasn't been made apparent in my little ramblings at the 5 minute mark already. And also a lot of socializing issues that also plague the low functioning aspects too, such as not being able to interpret just normal everyday conversation and like the beats of conversation, such as tone, appropriateness, and I don't, I being a shit socializer. Uh, um, I don't know what else there is to it. Tone, appropriateness, and what people are looking for. With me, I feel like my problem is the sympathy side of things. And I tend to be overly empathetic, which my definition of that is understanding of what the issue is, but not understanding of the emotional impact that issue has on someone because I'm too busy looking for how do we move on from there and fix the problem, if that makes sense. Maybe that's not technically the definition of empathy, but I call empathy, and I call a lot of things by the wrong name. um, okay, so we got all that out of the way, and let's talk about my backstory. And before this used to get really rambly because this is like take 5 for me. And backstory in short is I grew up in a communist country, Romania, and during the time of my birth, they were going through the transitional phase of getting rid of their leader and becoming a democracy. But as a result, there were unintentional victims, and those were us, the orphans. Back then, the mortality rate of the Romanian orphanages were a staggering 70 to 80%, meaning that 2 to 3 out of 10 kids survived. And the reason why a lot of them died was because malnutrition, improper care, just born with some kind of disease or disorder because it was the 80s and Romania was not immune to the AIDS epidemic. So that is a common one. Infighting within the orphanages amongst the kids because the caretakers did not really look after the kids. They were only there to feed and hose down the kids when they got dirty. So there was also hygiene issues that caused death, exposure to the elements, and so on. As I said, there's a huge myriad of diseases. A huge myriad of reasons why children died. I was adopted in 1991 by a U.S. couple who got the idea from watching a 2020 special. This next part is going to be very brief, very lacking of content for time reasons, and this is just an overview episode. I'll go into it later in more depth in other episodes, so I apologize firsthand. So basically, my childhood consisted of a lot of abuse, a lot of mental, physical, and emotional abuse. And when I say physical abuse, I mean being belted for 20 minutes straight while being berated and chastised and castrated by my mother. And as far as the emotional abuse is concerned, I was constantly told I wouldn't amount to anything and that I shouldn't have dreams. And also there's threats of sending me back to Romania to die or to a foster care system where I would be abused and molested. Then there's the fighting amongst the kids because the reality is if we were going to label people as victims, it wasn't me or my parents. It was their 2 biological kids that they had before they got me. Because they didn't sign up for the fight. I and my parents were willing participants in the battle, so they were just casualties. Now, the reason that it was such a harsh time was not just because of me, It was the emotional baggage I brought with me coming to the States that they weren't prepared for. The way I describe it is I feel like they expected to. It's like if you go to an animal shelter looking for a dog, and you find a dog, and you notice that he's got a lot of energy and is really rambunctious, and then when you bring it home, you realize you're told that this dog might have something weird with it. That it's not really just a dog, it's a wolf dog hybrid. I have a real big thing for dogs. Hence the whole conservation thing I'm trying to start up. But you're told that this dog is a wolf dog. And you're like, oh, that could be interesting. But you're not fully prepared to deal with what that actually means. And they weren't fully prepared to. So part of it was my own behavioral issues and my own aggression issues that I had as a result of where I came from. And another part of it was their gross inexperience and lack of preparation for taking care of someone who would have a lot of emotional and psychological damage from their previous experience. I always say that the first sign of trouble came when my mother told me about my adoption. Now, I was told in a very blunt manner, or that's how I remember it. The way I remember is that I was sat down and told that I wasn't a part of their family, but I was adopted from Romania. But that didn't mean that they didn't love me any less. And I kind of learned that wasn't exactly true. Or if it wasn't actually true, they did a shit job of portraying, or they did a shit job of proving that paranoia and fear and irrational thinking was unfounded and unjust. So with that just sowed mistrust in me, and I became belligerent, and I became a handful. I was admittedly a handful of a child, and so if we were to place blame, since who doesn't love doing that, it is a 50-50 blame. 50% of the it is 50% their fault and 50% of my fault, because I liked the battle and they did too. Or at least my mom did. I think my father just was annoyed. Anyways, it was made worse because for most of my life I went without anyone. Well, actually, I would argue for my whole life I was pretty much fighting alone. Until recently, because my brother and my stepfather have been pretty awesome. And so you're just constantly fighting every day of your life, and it gets tiresome. So by high school, I just became an apathetic mess and didn't graduate. I barely graduated. I graduated technically late with a D- average. Sorry. That it wasn't due to lack of intelligence. I'm an extremely intelligent guy, if I don't mind patting myself on the back. um, but it was just extreme apathy and lack of care and lack of foresight that teenage angst brings with it. So I got used to being alone. And when people did reach out to befriend me, it confused me, and I would be cautiously receptive of it. And that's how I got my first friend in high school that lasted 6 years and ended due to my inability to sustain a relationship and my natural autistic issues of not recognizing emotional issues within the other person and coming off as cold and distant. That my issue with it was it felt like he was trying to change me, but what he was trying to change were characteristics of me that were unchangeable, but could only be masked or covered up. Um, so after that, at 22, I was forced out of my parents' home, and my father put me up in a condo where I currently reside, and is what's right behind me. And with that, they kind of abandoned me there, and I don't talk to my father. The only time I ever talk to him is if he needs to tell me something like, "Oh, your car insurance changed," or "You need to go get the car um, emissions tested." Just bullshit like that. He never calls to see how I'm doing because he couldn't care less, which I knew from an early age. I always felt like he didn't care about me and he didn't want me, which I think is what caused a lot of animosity in my youth with him. That is weird wording, but you know what I mean. That a lot of our struggles were caused by my perception of him not wanting me. And a lot of them I don't feel were entirely unjust. Because there's a lot of body language that would show that he didn't like me. Like, whenever I was really young and I would try to sit on his lap while watching TV, he would magically have to get up and then kick me out of his chair. And any bonding thing just fell flat. We'll get into that more in the next episode on family. So we always had issues. He always hated how weird I was. He was always big on being normal, which our last name is Bayer, and he pretends to be Italian. How's that normal? Because Bayer's extremely Germanic. its literal translation is Bavarian, as someone who comes from Bavaria, because it's a variant of bear. Anyways, just shit like that. So we were always at ends, and we never saw eye to eye, and he always hated my weirdness. And we were very hostile with each other, admittedly so. Again, 50-50. He would always tell me I wouldn't amount to anything, and that I shouldn't have dreams, and I probably should just resign myself to working in a factory pushing a bun for the rest of my life. Very supportive fucking shit. It was annoying. So when I moved out, again, forced out, my social anxiety worsened. And I have this irrational fear of being judged. And I feel like everyone's judging me. That's why I don't go out as much, and that's why I'm kind of a recluse, because even when I go to like the grocery store, I'm always afraid that people are judging me. And it sometimes gets extremely crippling. It depends on my emotional state. So luckily we have a Walmart right by, and luckily Walmarts are usually 24 hours. So I do a lot of my grocery shopping at 2 a.m. when there's no one in the store. And I totally know that that's an irrational and illogical fear, but it's still a huge fucking issue for me. I mean, that was a very clumsy history of me, but it's getting along anyways. Oh, you know what? Before we do get into the actual how autism affects me part, there's one thing I need to say, because it wasn't constant shit. As much as I like to portray my childhood as constant shit, and the reason why I never left them was because of the money. Now, they weren't rich, but they weren't poor either. I think we would be considered upper middle class. So where the good things happen, or like the good times, were always family vacations. Either if it was going to Captiva Island in Florida, or our spring breaks were pretty fucking cool. We went to, how many kids could say they went to England for spring break, or France, or Italy? So it was a financial aspect that were good about the experience. Um, and those were usually 100% positive experiences, especially like when we would go up to our lake house in Michigan. Those were always fun and drama free. So if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say it was about 70% shitty, 30% good for my childhood. And again, I really want to state that I'm not naive. I'm not blind to the fact that I was also part of that problem. It wasn't all just them. Um, because otherwise it, and I totally recognize it, and we'll go into why that's the case later on when we talk about the negative aspects of my personality in their own individual episode. So let's go into the how autism affects me. Now, as I said, it's mostly a social issue with me. And the root of most of the social issues is the what I call, again, maybe wrongfully, a cognitive disconnect, or the inability to verbalize my thoughts and my feelings when they happen, especially in real time. So it becomes a problem like when you have something that's bothering you and you don't know how to explain a situation that's bothering you to another person. It becomes a problem, and it just logically it would be a problem if you couldn't tell people how you felt, when you needed help, and why you needed help. Is the most annoying aspect. The problem is, I feel like all my thoughts and ideas are locked away in my head, and I don't know how to share them with other people. And while there's some positive aspects to that, it's also extremely lonely. I guess the way I've described it before online is it's like being a prisoner in your own room, even though the door is always open and you can leave whenever. But you'll find out why it's still considered being a prisoner of your own room. And even though the room's beautiful and it's stocked with a lot of stuff, it's still a small area that you're confined to. But every time you try going outside, you transform into a monster, for lack of a better term. And whenever you try to communicate with people, it comes out in snarls and growls. And people tend to recoil at that, which causes frustration and anxiety in you, making that room look more and more pleasing, if not just for the self-preservation reasons, if that makes sense. That you start becoming conditioned to being alone. And that's my biggest issue. As I've said, as I'll say here, there's only one thing that offends me, and one thing that can just destroy me completely. And I really probably shouldn't be sharing it with the internet, but this is supposed to be an honest podcast and an honest look at the disorder and how it affects me in particular. And it's not when people call me names, because that's just fucking names. They don't mean anything. They're just vapid insults. It's when people attack my ideas and call them stupid, because I've been conditioned to not put myself out there, since my personal history has taught me that every time I put myself out there, I get chastised, made fun of, and just I've had negative experiences from my own family telling me that my dreams and ideas are stupid. So I rarely put myself out there, and when I do take that risk and it fails, it's earth shattering to me. And as much as I hate that, it's the truth. I wish I wasn't stuck in that rut and still prone to that illogical pitfall, but I am. Though, with that said, there's positive aspects to the disorder that I don't think get covered. Or no, that's not right. Ignore that. There's positive aspects to the disorder that I don't think a lot of people realize. And it is the fact that because of the disorder, I feel like I can see the world in a completely different light that you or someone else may not, or the average person may not be able to see. The way I describe it is it's like looking at a milk carton and seeing everything that milk carton can be, but what it can't be is milk carton because it's already a milk carton. Um, if that makes sense. So it's looking at something and seeing everything else that it's um yeah, I guess that I started I yeah. As I said, speaking's not my strongest suit. Um and I chose a podcast format. That's another thing with me is I'm huge on self-awareness, and the issue with the double-edged sword of self-awareness with me is I know my issues, but I don't know how to fix them. And that's also another point of frustration. But I like being able to come up with creative solutions to my problems, like this. My house is chock full of weird hacks and inventions that I created to fit my needs, and in most cases look really ugly. But I'm a function over form kind of person anyways, so if it works, that's good enough for me. And if I can make it look pretty, then that's a bonus. But it has to still be functional. And I'm going to make a video on all the crazy little hacks and inventions I've created to make living easier for me. So yeah, I love being able to see the world in a different light. And after I was told I had autism or Asperger's, sorry, um, I gained the ability to see things from everyone else's perspective, and I attribute that to the fact that that night after I was told by my dad's girlfriend, who's a psychologist, um, it was later verified by other doctors, so it wasn't a weird, ethically questionable situation. Um, that at that night, after I was told on an overly dramatic phone call that didn't need to be overly dramatic, on her part, I was forced to do soul searching, and I tried in that one night to dissect the root of all my problems and all of my irrational fears and everything. And after I did that, which I think I was pretty successful with, what I gained from it in its revelations was a new level of extreme self-awareness, and then the ability to see everyone's side and take a neutral stance on most things. Oh, you know what? I totally forgot to talk about the emotional aspect of the disorder. because I think that gets misunderstood. Now, in my case, I can feel emotions, but I can only feel the extremes or nothing. So there's three states that emotions come in for me: the positive extreme, the negative extreme, and the neutral. Um, and that goes with likes and interests. I'm either fully invested in something or not at all or just neutral. And it's that intensity that gets me into a lot of trouble. Um, it's that lack of nuance that normal human beings tend to have. Like, this is me guessing on it because, again, it's not a subject I'm extremely familiar on due to the fact that it's an alien concept that I can't wrap my head around, like relationships. Um, is like if we were, I guess the different shades of happiness are content, pleased, ecstatic. I get right. That seems like a realistic spectrum where ecstatic would be the extreme end, and contempt it means that you're okay with it and it's acceptable. Um, pleased being the middle of the road. I guess happy would fall in between pleased and ecstatic, but you get what I mean. Like emotions are spectrums, or they're supposed to be spectrums, but for me, they're not spectrums. There's only three settings to them, and that's an issue. So, and my intensity is an issue because I'm an extremely passionate guy, and when I care about something, I care about it wholeheartedly. And a lot of times that passion gets misrepresented, my fault, as extreme rage or anger, especially online. I can become a very hyperbolic and abrasive person online. And I don't regret what I write because most of the times when I write something that's purposefully divisive, the people that I'm supposedly attacking usually come out of the woodworks agreeing with my stance. And the only ones that are offended by it are people who can't relate to the group that I'm supposedly attacking. Um, which I think is a huge problem I have with most of the online interactions is the whole SJW thing. Because as someone with a disability and seeing these assholes come to our defense who are in all regards most of the time normal white people trying to take on the plates of different people without any way of being able to share in our plight because they don't know what it's actually like to be different because they're too busy being normal. And of course, they'll argue that, oh no, everyone's different and everyone's got their quirks and bullshit like that. But the reality is, they're detached from that situation and they're making judgments on the behalf of another group that they can't ever fully relate to. What does a white girl know about black problems? She'll never know about that situation because she doesn't live in that world. Yet they have this unnecessary need to speak on their behalf, which they fail to realize when you do that, that's super fucking insulting. Due to the fact that what you're doing is saying, oh, you guys are too weak to speak on your own behalf. You need us to speak on your behalf for you because you clearly can't. And that's why I have a huge problem with the whole white knight social justice thing that's going on and is really popular in culture today, especially in the States and most of the developed nations. It seems like England and the United States are the hugest culprits for this, and Canada too. Um, and I don't know why it's those three countries that are just really, really bad about it, but it seems that way. And I just hate it. Because my whole thing is equality. I'm huge on equality. And what I mean by that is that equality is not a positive or negative thing, it's a neutral thing. Just like justice is. If you want the right to be heard, then the other person should have the right to be heard too. Even if that even if what he's saying doesn't mesh with your ideology, it doesn't make either of you guys right. What you're sharing is your opinion on things. And I think the problem with people is they forget that opinions aren't right, they aren't wrong, they're just that. They're just your feelings on the matter. Um, Now they can be backed up by facts, but the reality is you can always find supporting arguments for your cause if you know where to look. But when you look at the source of those supporting arguments, you find that they're extremely biased. And you're purposely picking that source because it proves your point. You're not picking from a neutral source. Because most of the times those don't actually exist. And that's why I'm an agnostic theist. I know that seems like a huge leap, but it's not, because I've learned through my life, and for me personally, I believe that we don't know anything. That it's impossible to know anything, and I'm okay with it. And a lot of people look at that as a very negative thing. I'm a huge believer in the idea of nothing. And that's not to say I'm an atheist, because I'm not. I'm an agnostic theist, meaning that I leave the door open for a godlike entity to exist. Because I don't think either side, I don't think either side has right answers, but I also don't think either side is 100% wrong, because there's holes in science that religion does fill and address, and vice versa. That I don't think that, and that's why I'm big on equality, because I believe both things have a huge and important place in society. And that if you close the door to one thing, then you're closing off a possible route and avenue to look down, which means that you're not getting the insight from that angle. And then you're not getting the full picture either. So that's why I'm huge on what I call equality, nothing, and justice. Because when you live in the middle, you get to see both sides, and you're not invested on either side. And I feel like you can learn the most as a result from that position. So that's kind of a basic overview of episode 1 and what to expect in this podcast. And to make it a little easier for you guys, if it just became a rambling and incoherent mess, I'll just go through the bullet points. So autism's a mental disorder you're born with that affects social interactions and your verbal skills, but to what degree depends on your level of autism, or another way to put it is whether or not you're a low functioning autistic person or a high functioning sorry, or a high functioning autistic person. And yeah, that cough was to cover up a burp. If we're going to be honest about that, sorry. As my background, I came from a communist country, and my childhood was kind of shitty, but family vacations were awesome. And I'm a 28-year-old shut-in who's now trying to get his life back together. Where the biggest issues with autism is the inability to verbalize my thoughts and emotions when I need to or sustain a real life conversation with a human being due to the fact that it's extremely emotionally taxing. But the positive aspects of it is the fact that it allows me to view the world in a very weird and fun way that I would never give up for anything, because it's such a great experience when you have an idea and you execute the idea and it pays off and it works, even if it looks like shit. Like this. I love that due to the way my mind is wired, I can just cobble stuff together in a MacGyver-esque way and create something that works for my needs. So that's pretty much the summary recap. And next time, I don't know what we'll be covering because I kind of put this together as a last minute impulsive thing for Autism Awareness April. With that said, who knows what's going to be covered next, but I'll try to get another episode up next week. It's kind of hard for me to do this, and that's why it took a long time for this one to be done, because I wanted to get 4 done within this month, but my own bullshit issues got in the way. And I apologize for that. So, with that said, please subscribe, comment, like, or don't. Like, I mean, I hate when people say that because then you're kind of forcing their hand. But I would like to hear your feedback so I can make it better. The next episode shouldn't be as weird and disjointed. It's just the fact that this is a kind of a very vague catch-all episode that it was a little bit all over the place, which was also done on purpose so you could see the real-time thought process that goes into having this, the real-time processing that happens with someone who has an Asperger disorder. And sometimes it's not as linear as you'd like. But with that said, again, please subscribe if you want to see some cute raccoon videos later this year. And sorry, I was looking at the little woodlouse spider. Look that one up. Holy cow, they're weird. They're creepy and red looking, and they've got really intimidating fangs. Sorry. So yeah, please subscribe because later on this year, there's going to be some really weird stuff going on with this channel that I think you'll be interested in. And I'll get to creating another exotic animal podcast that will be covering raccoon ownership and I'll try to get it out before the end of this week. So, thank you for listening. Please subscribe. I know I said that 3 times, and now it's just becoming abusive. Terribly sorry about that. Until next time, be well.